from the Certo and Certo book, and specifically we were concerned about. Uh, yeah, okay, let me present the screen first. Present my entire screen. And can you see this PowerPoint slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we were talking about chapter number 10 from the Certo and Certo book, which was about organizing, and specifically the concern here is the structure that the organizations can take. And the question is that does the structure come first, and then strategies and missions and visions and objectives come later, or is it the case that those precede the structures, right? So normally what we find is that perhaps when the organization is being formulated at that time, it may be the case that the vision and mission comes first and then the structure comes in later. But once the organization has been started and is going, then eventually with time, the vision, mission, strategies, etc., do get revised, but the structure doesn't change that drastically. That is not to say that it can never change, because we do find instances where organizations have sort of reimagined themselves, and they must definitely have restructured themselves as well. Examples of companies that have restructured would include, for example, IBM Corporation. IBM Corporation used to make calculators for businesses, and then it decided that it wanted to get into the software business and also into the computer business. So that would require a tremendous amount of restructuring of that company, because the nature of the business would have changed, right? Similarly, there's NCR Corporation, the people that make Teradata. That's the database on which the Nadra office is running. So if we think about NCR Corporation, it started as a company that used to make cash registers for businesses. And then eventually it also decided to abandon this cash register business and move towards this business of databases, and also basically different type of machines for businesses, right? So that would have also required a bit of a restructuring. But the idea being that structuring is important, and the reason that we like to structure our organization into different hierarchies is the same principles that we got from the basics of management, which was to somehow overcome this tremendous amount of complexity that this organization has to deal with. And how do you deal with this complexity is to use a very simple mechanism, that is to divide the organization into smaller and smaller pieces, right? And the same would be applicable to different types of complex tasks as well. The same mentality would state that we should divide a very complex task into small pieces also, right? So the more the number of pieces there are, the more the perception is that that particular thing is going to be more complex. And the same would apply for organizations as well, right? तो इसका मैं आपको बताता हूँ. I'll open up something else just to sort of do this. Let's open up a notepad for a second, right? So if we take the formula, for example, the channels of communication, it's just to sort of illustrate this idea of complexity, right? So there's a formula to calculate the channels of communications that exist between people, and that is n, thus n divided by n plus 1 divided by, yeah, so this is the formula. N plus 1 divided by n, and n is the number of people, right? So if you've got two people, then you've got 2 into n plus 1. Yeah, there's also a 2 here, right? So if we consider n to be the number of people that are there in an organization or in some sort of a organizational group, then the number of channels of communication amongst these people can be calculated by putting that information there, right? So if you take two people, so there's 2 plus 1 is 3, and 3 multiplied by 2 is 6, and that divided by the two people is whatever the answer that comes out. So that's the number of channels of communication that exist amongst two people. And if you keep on increasing the number, you'll keep seeing that the channels of communication increases tremendously, right? So to simply, it's a very simple formula which illustrates this idea that organizations are quite complex, and the more the number of people that we have in an organization, the more complex it is going to become. And the reason for this complexity is that the channel of communications amongst these people is going to increase exponentially. And that is going to eventually render communications very difficult to handle. So, therefore, the idea is to somehow divide the organization into smaller pieces where the channel of communication remains fewer or lesser. And in that way, communication could happen more easily amongst these different types of groups, right? So that's why we would like to sort of divide our organization into smaller and smaller pieces. Now, in order to do this, we need to have a very clear idea of what it is that every person in this organization should be doing. And we should have very clear sort of terms of reference for these people, which is to state that we should know exactly what these people are supposed to be doing, right? We shouldn't have anybody in the organization claiming to us that they don't know what their task is, or if a task is placed in front of a bunch of people, we shouldn't have the case where some people would say that this is not my task, and other people will also say that this is not my task. And we don't want to have a situation where we have a task on hand and nobody is willing to own that task, right? So the idea is to somehow reflect against what it is that we're trying to do, establish some sort of a hierarchy in this organization, set up the organization, and then divide it into smaller pieces, and then allocate to different resources to those small pieces, and then evaluate to see whether you are doing well. And if not, then you are going to go about restructuring your organization. So this is sort of like the steps that we have. Reflect against the plans that you have, then think about the objectives that you want to sort of achieve with those plans, and then somehow figure out some sort of a structure that you think is going to work well for this organization, allocate the resources into it, and then evaluate to see whether that is working for you or not. And that is going to give you feedback, and this is going to be a sort of a open loop type of a cycle in which there's always feedback coming around, and the organization is going to be constantly thinking about restructuring itself. Now, the overall organization is this, right? This is the overall system that sort of runs the organization. The organization as a whole receives some sort of an input. Some big levels of processes will happen in that organization, and then some sort of an output would be created, right? So if you take, for example, Toyota Pakistan, they're going to get inputs, which is going to be in very loose terms in this particular figure. We will say that these inputs would be raw material, right? These raw materials would be processed, and the output would be that we are going to get fully functional cars coming out of this factory. So that's the overall system that's going on. Now, if you think about the process, that process can be divided into smaller other subsystems, so to speak, right? So we could have, for example, the subsystem of putting the body together of the car, and the subsystem of sort of painting the cars and the other panels that go with the body of it. Then there could be a subsystem that's concerned with the electronics of the car, a subsystem that's concerned with the mechanics of the car, and so on and so forth. And each of these subsystems, which comprise together to form the overall system of the organization, they are also going to have their own inputs. They will apply each of these subsystems will apply their own processes, and then we are going to have some sort of an output. So what happens in the left side of the diagram is an input comes in, a process gets applied, and the output comes out, and that output is sort of like a finished good. That's a, no, the organization doesn't want to do anything else as far as the processing of that material is concerned, and it has decided that that's the shape that it wants to keep that item in, and it will send it out into the marketplace. It may, this output on the left hand side may eventually become an input for some other organization, but as far as this particular organization is concerned, that output is complete, and this is basically what this organization's existence is all about. But on the right hand side, the outputs that we are getting, they are going to become inputs for other subsystems, right? So one subsystem is going to get some sort of an input, is going to apply some sort of a process on it, and it will create an output, and that output will become an input for some other subsystem. So for example, the body of the car will get assembled, welded, it will receive all the side panels and so forth, and then that will become an input for the next step, for example, in which the seats would be installed in it. And once that's done, it will get to be an input for the next step, which would be, for example, the installation of the dashboard and so on and so forth, right? So these organizing subsystems outputs become input for other subsystems in the organization, but eventually you will have some sort of a organizing subsystems, the output of which will then eventually become the final output of the organization as well, right? So this is how the systems and subsystems concept work. Big complex systems are generally composed of other organizing subsystems. You could also take the analogy of the human body in this systems and subsystems manner to sort of understand this idea a bit more. Your overall human body that you possess, that is a big system, right? And then inside you, there are other subsystems that exist. For example, your nervous system, your central nervous system, your respiratory system, your digestive system, your endocrine system, and so on and so forth, right? All these subsystems are working. That's why you are functioning. If some of your subsystems do not work, then you will definitely not be in a condition where you will be sitting in this class and you will be fine, right? So you'll be sick if something is wrong with your subsystem. So the idea is to keep these subsystems going. And the thought is to somehow reduce the complexity of the system by organizing the company into smaller and smaller pieces, right? Now, the book says that inputs are of different types. There are 4 different types of inputs that are mentioned. One is people, right? So human resources would be a input that we put into a particular type of a system. The second input that normally goes into a system is in the form of money. The third input is a raw material, which would be unfinished goods. And the fourth input that goes into a system is the machines that we possess, or the capital assets that we have, right? So these are generally the 4 inputs that we have. And regardless of the type of organization that we have, we are always going to have these 4 inputs on our hand for the most part, right? Then certain types of processes are applied in the organization, which is that and in this way we are specifically thinking about the way that the organization is going to be set up, right? So in this way, the processes are reflective against the way that the organization is going to be structured. So reflect on the plans and the objectives that the organization has. Establish major tasks that need to be performed. Divide those major tasks into subtasks and allocate resources and directives for the subtasks that you want to do, and then evaluate the results of the organizing strategy. And the output is that you are going to get some sort of a organization, right? So let's have a look now to see what we can think about in terms of these structures of the organizations are concerned, right? So, for example, launch this software. Can you see the screen, the blank screen?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Okay, just 1 second, beta. Can you see this one now? The blank
Yes,
screen?
sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's take this software and okay, so let's suppose we've got a big type of a product, right? And that product is a aircraft. Okay. Now, an aircraft can be composed of various other components. Right? For example, the aircraft would be. यार ये मुझे कौन मैसेजेस कर रहे हैं क्या आवाज़ आ रही है इसमें से okay. The aircraft would be composed of the frame of the aircraft. The aircraft would be composed of, for example, the navigation system. The aircraft would be composed of the fuselage, or let's say the wings, then that's a simple way of saying it. It will be having the wings, etc., and it would have some sort of um, mechanics or engines, and it will be composed of some sort of trainings, etc., that we are going to give to the people, and so on and so on and so forth. Right. So we have taken a big system which happens to be an aircraft, and we're saying that this aircraft could be composed of various different components, and we'll sort of put all these components in one particular line here and say here are the big pieces of the aircraft, and then we could have arrows going from each of these, and we can connect them with each other, right? We can say this is connected to this, and this is derived from this one and from this one and this one, and we could sort of give some names to it as well, etc., etc., right? So here is an aircraft that has been divided into its small major components. Then if we think about the frame of the aircraft, the frame of the aircraft could contain some other pieces. For example, it could contain the cockpit where the pilot, etc., is going to be sitting, and also this aircraft is going to be composed of the main body in which the passengers are going to be sitting, and then it's going to have some sort of a tail end to itself as well. So we put a tail here also. So we've got a tail going on. And now we can connect these with each other and say, well, here is how these are connected with each other. And then from the cockpit, we could also think about some other components in the cockpit. And from there, we could think about, let's assume that there are two components here. From there, we can think about some other subcomponents to this, right? And sort of we get this type of a structure. So we had the cockpit, and that got divided into some component, and this component got divided into some components, and so on and so forth, right? So we are taking a very complex type of a system, and we are slowly and gradually dividing it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, right? And the reason we're doing this is because we want to sort of get rid of this complexity. Because if I were to just hand over this idea that my organization needs to build an aircraft, that's a very lofty, big goal, and that's the scary goal, right? But if we divide this and we sort of say that, well, here's your job is to install the seats in the aircraft, and here's your job, which is to install the the, I don't know, the top panel for XYZ purpose. So suddenly we have narrowed down this big task into these smaller individual pieces, which are a bit more manageable and they are easy to deal with. And this seat can now be sort of installation of the seats could now be assigned to somebody. And we could say, well, we've got a group or we've got a small, sort of a working group that's going to be concerned about the installation of this. And the people assigned to the seats would know clearly the job that they need to perform. The people assigned to the subcomponents of the navigation system would know exactly what it is that they need to do. And similarly, people assigned to the engine and the subcomponents within it would know exactly what they need to do as well, right? So this is how we sort of start thinking about the organization that we are trying to establish. And it's a sort of a way for us to sort of divide this big complex system into smaller and smaller pieces for ourselves, just to sort of get rid of this complexity that sort of exists in the system, right? So this is how things are going to be going. And once we have sort of done this, we are then going to reflect, right? Once we have done number three here in the middle, dividing the major task into subtasks, the fourth item is to then allocate resources to it, right? And once the resources have been allocated, then the fifth item is to check to see if that resulting organizational design that we have come up with is actually creating the benefit that we want to sort of achieve from it. And if it is, we find we keep it in that way. If it isn't, then we sort of amend it, we change it, and then we evaluate to see how well that change sort of worked, right? So it does this other thing for us as well, right? It does this other thing, which is this one, which is this idea of from a person by the name of Kurt Lewin, right? And it's the idea of unfreeze, then change, and then refreeze. Right? So this is the idea that once an organizational structure has been made, is going to be frozen, and then we will continue to use that for some period of time. And then if we find that it's not working, we are going to unfreeze that structure. We're going to introduce the idea of change in that. And once the change has been implemented or it has been integrated, we are going to refreeze the organization, right? This is normally used in the sense of organizational learning. And organizational learning, and this is exactly what we have. We've got a learning organization in front of us, and we are saying that this is what we are going to do. We are going to come up with a structure, we're going to freeze that structure, put it into place, then we're going to check to see how we are performing. If we are performing fine, it remains frozen. If we are not, then we are going to unfreeze that structure, make further changes into it, and then refreeze it, and then let it go again. And we're trying to see if it helps us to achieve the strategy that we have. So we talked a little bit about these different types of ways through which structuring could happen. And this is sort of something that we get from Maxwell Weber and his bureaucratic model. And the idea is that a bureaucratic model is a beautiful thing. And the idea being that if everybody knows exactly what they need to do, then we are going to have this seamless type of a system which will act extremely fluidly, and it's not going to introduce any delays to the piece of work that needs to be done. And once a piece of work enters that system, it is going to exit as rapidly as possible, right? At least that's the idea of bureaucracy. It's unfortunate that the term bureaucracy nowadays sort of connotates or means red tapeism and delays and so on and so forth. But the idea being that if we've got a well structured organization where everybody is clear on what they need to do, that organization is going to run seamlessly and perfectly, and it will be the most efficient type of organization in front of us, right? So now, if we think about the structures that we are trying to make, we should be thinking in terms of two basic structures. One is the formal structure, and that's pretty much the one that we are concerned with, of dividing this organization into its residual components. Right? There's also the informal structure, which I mentioned last week to you all, but that informal structure is self-arising, it's emergent. Right? Nobody, for example, in your class suggested that you become friends with X, Y, and Z person. That friendship just sort of emerged for some reason. Nobody forced that friendship upon you. It wasn't designed by the Institute of Management Sciences in any way, right? So the formal structure of your class, that is picking all of you and putting you into group A of the BBA, that is your formal structure. The informal structure is basically the friendships and the camaraderies that you have founded within that classroom, right? So our concern for right now is the formulation of the formal structure, right? Now, within this formal structure, you've got authority and you've got responsibility. Authority, if you remember, we had defined authority as the right to use resources necessary for you to conduct a particular job, right? So if you have certain responsibility, that is, that you have been made accountable to do something, you should also be given the authority, which means that you should be given this ability to use the resources necessary to get the job done for yourself, right? So that's the authority level. Now, that comes both from the formal structure, and sometimes also authority comes from the informal structure. And the informal structure level authority is perhaps considered to be the more longer lasting type of an authority that a person could have. And that would mean, for example, by being recognized as an expert by your peers, right? So if your peers consider you to be an expert in something, they will respect you for a much more longer period of time as compared to the authority that you get because you got put into a particular box in the organizational structure, right? So the informal structure has its own role to play, but we are not very much concerned with that for the moment, right? Now, what can we do is that we could sort of go towards this idea of departmentalization, right? We could divide our organization into smaller departments, but what kind of departments can be formulated? Well, there's the normal functional department, there's the product level department, there's the geographic departmentalization, there's the customer level departmentalization, and then there's also the manufacturing process level departmentalization. So we've got about 5 different types of structures that can be sort of created. And this is the one that we looked at last week. And this would be an idea of a small restaurant being broken down into its different components. So we get a hierarchy, and the restaurant manager being at the top of this hierarchy because he is the highest level manager available, and the waiter, busboy, etc. would be at the lowest level of the organizational hierarchy. And then you've got some mid-level managers in the form of a busboy, a head chef, etc. and they are sort of in the middle. So it's not a very tall hierarchy. It's only got three layers: the restaurant manager, the mid level, and the lower level. And that's the extent of this organization, because it's a small organization. And if you look at the titles that are placed in each of these boxes, everybody is concerned with specific functions that they need to perform within that organization. The chef would know exactly what they need to do. The busboy is clear as to what his or her job is. The waiter is clear as to what they need to do. And the head waiter, etc., and the head chef and the busboy supervisor, everybody knows exactly what they need to do. There's no sort of overlap amongst the jobs that the people need to do. Here's another type of a hierarchy that we saw as well, and this is sort of dividing the organization by the primary functions that are performed there, right? So production function, marketing, and finance. And then there's also a little bit of this residual feel that there's a regional breakdown here as well, because you've got the vice president of the North region, right? Then you've got another structure which is based upon different products. So it's some sort of furniture company that's being broken down into the different component products that it makes. So chairs, beds, tables, etc. Right? So that's a product level division. And then you've got a territory level division, which sort of goes into the idea of geography. So here you've got the west, the north, and the east region, right? So you're dividing it by regionality. And you have based on a breakdown available based upon customers. So for example, if you're a bookseller, you could be selling to educational institutes, you could be selling to different types of professional bodies, you could be selling to individuals and so forth, right? So in that way, you could be dividing yourself into different types of customers, and you could also break yourself down by the different types of manufacturing processes that you perform. And these processes, as an example, in the case of the furniture factory, would be cutting the wood, sanding the things, gluing things together, painting them, and then you put the word department next to it. So you've got the wood cutting department, the sanding department, the gluing department, and so forth. So you've got sort of like a assembly line type of an idea going on here, and that's the primary manufacturing process being applied. And if you combine all of these together, you get the overall organizational structure. And I give you the sense that the overall organizational structure is not simply just one way of breaking down that organization coming together. It is a combination of different possible ways that made sense for that organization uh, when they were thinking about how to divide themselves, and those different ways are then combined together. So here you've got a bit of regional territorial breakdown going on, a bit of functional breakdown taking place there, a bit of manufacturing level breakdown, and a little bit of sort of customer oriented breakdown happening together. So the overall organizational structure is a possible combination arising from different types of sub divisions that are possible, right? So this is what the overall organizational structure looks like. And now once you get this structure, what's the next step is then to sort of allocate the resources to each of the boxes that you have here. And by that, I mean allocate the human resource, assign the people, right? Who is the vice president of the Western region? Put their name there. Who is the vice president of the Northern region? Put that person's name into that box, right? Who is the assistant vice president of marketing? Who, for example, is the marketing research manager? So insert the names of the individuals that are going to be filling in the responsibilities that go along with each of these boxes. And the individuals should know very clearly their terms of reference. They should know exactly what they need to do, when they need to do it, so that there's no unclarity in the organization. Right? And whose job is it to make sure that everybody in the organization knows what they are supposed to be doing. That is the job of the human resource management department, and specifically the human resource manager, right? Job descriptions need to be created which would describe what the job is, and the job design needs to take place, which would describe how that job actually works, right? So everybody should have their job design, and everybody should have their job description in the sense of the terms of reference, right? Now, what advantages that do we get by doing this, right? By breaking down this organization into small pieces, what advantages do we get? Well, we definitely get this advantage that we've got now a well-structured organization. We've got people who are placed into these different types of setups. Everybody knows what they are supposed to be doing, and so on and so forth. And then there's also this idea of a reporting relationship that's clear as well, right? So the painting department and the gluing and the sanding and the wood cutting, they are responsible all the way up here to the production superintendent, who is responsible to the assistant vice president of production, who is responsible to the vice president of the North region in this case, and who eventually is then responsible to the president of the organization. So this particular bunch of people working in these small little departments, they know exactly how that chain of responsibility sort of functions, right? Who is responsible to whom, and so on and so forth. So that's a pretty good advantage that we get. But what's the disadvantage? Well, the disadvantage is that people become specialized, and they only are then concerned with that particular job that they have been assigned to. So the person working in the gluing department only thinks about gluing things together. That person doesn't have an overall big picture understanding of that organization at all. Rather they are simply focused upon that one particular job that they are supposed to do. So the disadvantage of this division of labor is that people become specialized, and which is not a bad thing. But then they start working in silos. They are sort of working in isolation, right? They're working in isolation in the sense that they are receiving inputs, they're processing that, they're producing output, and then they don't really get to meet or talk or discuss with anybody else as to what is going on. So there's this tremendous amount of sort of discontent that exists in the organization, where people are doing jobs, but they don't seem to own that particular product in any particular way, right? I'll give you an example. If we take, if we consider ourselves to be working in, for example, Ferrari Corporation, right? और हम फरारी की असेंबली लाइन पे काम कर रहे हैं, और मुझे एज एन एग्जांपल ये टास्क दी गई है कि बैटरी के जो टर्मिनल्स हैं उसके ऊपर मैंने एक जगह पे वो इलेक्ट्रिकल टेप चढ़ानी है, ठीक है। रील बटी को ये काम दिया गया है कि वो बैटरी के टर्मिनल्स जिसके ऊपर मैंने टेप चढ़ा दिया है, वो गाड़ी आगे बढ़ेगी तो इनके पास आएगी, एंड व्हाट रील विल डू इज दैट he'll put the positive terminal on the positive of the battery and tighten the screw, and he'll put the negative wala on the negative and tighten the screw, and then it goes further, and somebody else in the classroom will do something else, and somebody else will do something else, so on and so on and so forth. और एक दिन हम सारे कहीं इधर उधर जा रहे हैं, और मैं अकेले अपना फिर रहा हूँ, आप अकेले अपना फिर रहे हैं, और हमें कोई फरारी नजर आ जाती है, तो क्या मैं ये क्लेम कर सकता हूँ कि ये फरारी मैंने बनाई है? क्या रील बटी ये क्लेम कर सकता है कि ये फरारी उसने बनाई है? Can anybody make that claim now?
नो सर।
नो सर, क्योंकि सर सबने थोड़ा थोड़ा काम किया उसमें।
हाँ ना, तो हम अब वो कह ही नहीं सकते कि ये मेरी बनाई हुई है। मैं उसके ऊपर अपना नाम ही नहीं लिख सकता कि यार this is the handiwork of Salim Goel, or it's the handiwork of Aril Bhatia or anybody else for that matter, right? क्या हो गया है उधर? डिविजन ऑफ लेबर इस हद तक चली गई है कि एज अ वर्कर जो काम मैं और आप कर रहे हैं, हम 9 to 5 वो कर रहे हैं, हमें उसके पैसे मिल रहे हैं, हमें पेंशन मिल रही है, हमें ये मिल रहा है, वो मिल रहा है, हेल्थ केयर एंड सो ऑन एंड सो फॉर। लेकिन एंड ऑफ द डे क्या हम उस फाइनल प्रोडक्ट को ओन करते हैं? तो हम नहीं करते, राइट। अब इसके बरक्स अगर अरील भट्टी और मैं घर पे ऑमलेट बनाएं, ठीक है, और वो बड़ा अच्छा बने, तो क्या अब हम क्लेम कर सकते हैं कि ये मैंने बड़ा अच्छा ऑमलेट बनाया है?
यस सर।
Yes, sir.
क्योंकि उसमें और कोई नहीं था ना, मैंने खुद से सारा कुछ किया या रील ने खुद से सारा कुछ किया। सो इन दैट वे वी हैव दैट एडवांटेज के उधर एक सॉर्ट ऑफ वो आर्टिस्टिक सा एफर्ट हो रहा है, एक आर्टिजन वाला फिनोमेना है। तो वो आर्टिस्ट हो गया या वो क्रिएटर हो गया, वो अपने प्रोडक्ट के साथ कनेक्टेड है, ठीक है। सो एडवांटेज ऑफ द डिवीजन ऑफ लेबर ये है कि एफिशिएंसी आ जाएगी, स्पेशलाइजेशंस आ जाएंगे और प्रोसेसेस बड़े तेज चलेंगे। लेकिन डिसएडवांटेज इसका क्या है कि ये डिसकंटेंट बनाएगा, ये आपके अंदर एक छोटा सा दुख और दर्द छोड़ेगा ना, क्योंकि अब आप कुछ कर रहे हो और आपको उसकी कोई यूटिलिटी नजर नहीं आ रही और आप समझते हैं कि ये जो मेरा काम है ना, ये क्या है, ये मैं करता क्या जा रहा हूँ, है। इसको कहते हैं मार्क्सिज्म। ये जो मैं आपको ये थॉट एक्सप्लेन कर रहा हूँ ना, दिस इज नोन एज मार्क्सिज्म। एंड द मार्क्सिस्ट थॉट इज एग्जैक्टली दिस, दैट as society has become more commercialized, people have been picked up and they have been put into this assembly line type of life, और जब से एग्रीकल्चरल एज से हम उसमें मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एज में आए हैं तो ये ज़्यादा प्रेवलेंट हो गया। और इसकी वजह से क्या हो गया है कि लोग डिसकंटेंट में चले गए, डिसकंटेंट इन द सेंस कि अब वो उस फाइनल प्रोडक्ट को ओन नहीं करते और वो बड़ी सी पिक्चर में अपने आप को देखते नहीं है और ना ही उनको उनकी वो फिटिंग होती है, बिकॉज उनका काम इतना मिनिस्क्यूल सा है। So what does that create is that people are unhappy, right? So the disadvantage is discontent and so forth, right? अब इस discontent से निकलने का तरीका क्या है? कार्ल मार्क्स इसकी एक सजेशन भी देता है। उसने देखा कि लोग क्या करते हैं ना कि they work the whole week, they save up their money, and then on the weekends they do all kind of parties and whatever एडवेंचर टूरिज्म पे चले जाते हैं। कोई खानपुर डैम में जाके ग्लाइडिंग कर रहा है, तो कोई जाके वो रिपेलिंग कर रहा है, कोई रॉक क्लाइंबिंग कर रहा है, कोई स्कूबा डाइविंग करने चला गया। ये लोग क्यों कर रहे हैं सारा कुछ वीकेंड के ऊपर? क्योंकि उनको जो पूरे हफ्ते वो चुभन हो रही होती है ना दिल में कि ये मेरा काम क्या है और ये मैं कर क्या रहा हूँ, तो उस एंगस्ट को मारने के लिए they resort to this sort of exploring on the weekend and doing very strange type of things, right? So that's the idea of the division of labor. But a division of labor does require a lot of sort of coordination to be put in place as well, right? तो जब तक हमारे पास coordination mechanisms नहीं होंगे तब तक हमारी division of labor काम नहीं करेगी. So we need to create very good reporting relationships. We need to also put down when particular reports will be generated, how and in what format that reporting is going to take place, who is going to be responsible for creation of that report, who is going to be responsible for receiving that report, and all that stuff needs to be thought out as well. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब इसके साथ साथ जब हायरार्की एस्टैब्लिश होना शुरू हो जाती है ना, तो इसके साथ साथ एक और थॉट आ जाती है जिसको हम कहते हैं स्पैन ऑफ मैनेजमेंट, राइट? स्पैन ऑफ मैनेजमेंट ये है, देखें, ये जो प्रेसिडेंट है ना, सबसे ऊपर जिसको बनाया हुआ है, he's got or she's got the highest span of control, right? इसके नीचे देखें वाइस प्रेसिडेंट वेस्ट भी है, नॉर्थ का भी है, ईस्ट का भी है। इसके नीचे ये असिस्टेंट वीपी प्रोडक्शन भी है, वीपी मार्केटिंग भी है, वीपी फाइनेंस भी है, and so on. And all these people are under this president of the company, and he or she has the highest span of control in this organization. But if you look at, for example, the production superintendent in the north region here, this production superintendent only has a span of control that goes from and controls these four departments, right? और फिर इस वुड कटिंग डिपार्टमेंट का भी कोई फोरमैन होगा, तो उसका स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल फिर और भी लिमिटेड होगा और वो एक डिपार्टमेंट लेवल तक ही महदूद होगा, राइट? सो वी नीड टू स्टार्ट थिंकिंग आल्सो as far as the spans of control are concerned. और इसके लिए एक अगर आप इस चैप्टर 10 को खोलें ना, तो इसमें एक ग्रेकुनस के नाम से एक बंदा है. His formula is there in the book. It's called the Grakunas's formula, and that formula can quantitatively tell you the extent of the span of control that a particular manager has, right? So the higher that you are in the organization, the greater the span of control that you would have. The lower that you are in the organization, the more different the span of control would be. Now, how do you increase the span of control of other managers, right? इसका तो high है. ये बाकियों का span of control आप कैसे increase करेंगे? For example, assistant vice president of production का span of control कैसे बढ़ाया जाए? या फॉर एग्जांपल ये वुड कटिंग डिपार्टमेंट वालों का स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल है, इसको ज्यादा करने के लिए हम क्या कर सकते हैं? हम क्या करेंगे फिर? हम ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की हाइट के साथ खेलेंगे, ठीक है? हाइट क्या है कि ऊपर से निचले वाले बंदे के बीच में और कितने बॉक्सेस मौजूद हैं. सो द मोर द नंबर ऑफ बॉक्सेस, द हायर द हाइट ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन और द ग्रेटर द हाइट ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. And the fewer the boxes between the topmost and the bottommost person, the more flatter that organization is, right? So in order to increase the span of control of the different managers that we have in an organization, we should start thinking about compressing that organization and making it more flatter, right? So if we do this, we will have more greater spans of control for the people. So kindly do look up the Grakunas's formula in the book. You don't need to memorize the formula, but at least you should be aware of it. And what is the Grakunas's formula used for? It is used for that one singular purpose, which is to determine the span of control of the managers that exist within an organization. ठीक है? और इसके अंदर जो स्केलर रिलेशनशिप्स हैं वो तो वो फेयोल ने हमें कहा था ना. तो स्केलर रिलेशनशिप क्या है कि बॉटम मोस्ट जो बंदे हैं, ये इनको कौन सुपरवाइज कर रहा है, तो ये बंदा इनको कौन सुपरवाइज कर रहा है, तो ये बंदा इसको कौन सुपरवाइज कर रहा है, तो ये और इसको कौन. तो आप देखें तो हर एक लेवल के ऊपर एक ही पर्टिकुलर मैनेजर है, यानी कि क्वालिटी कंट्रोल के ऊपर असिस्टेंट वाइस प्रेसिडेंट प्रोडक्शन है. क्वालिटी कंट्रोल वाले को कोई और बंदा वो नहीं कर रहा ना, मैनेज नहीं कर रहा. जस्ट every sort of box has one particular manager on top of it. So that is a good thing because otherwise Feol बेचारा बड़ा upset हो जाता, and he would definitely have a reason to be upset because people would be having problems in the sense that they would have two different managers there. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब कुछ फैक्टर्स हैं जो आपके उसको अफेक्ट करते हैं, स्पैन ऑफ मैनेजमेंट कंट्रोल को इफेक्ट करते हैं, और ये फैक्टर्स हैं सिमिलरिटी ऑफ फंक्शंस, जियोग्राफिक कंटिग्यूटी यानी कि जियोग्राफिक रीजन्स आपस में घुले मिले से हों, कंप्लेक्सिटी ऑफ फंक्शंस, कोऑर्डिनेशन और प्लानिंग. तो मुख्तलिफ फैक्टर्स आइडेंटिफाई किए गए which have an effect upon the span of control, and you could simply just memorize these five. कि स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल किस चीज़ से अफेक्ट होता है? सिमिलरिटी ऑफ फंक्शन से. सिमिलरिटी ऑफ फंक्शंस का क्या मतलब है? तो अब आप देखें, अगर इस हायरार्की की तरफ आप देखें ना, तो अगर नॉर्दर्न रीजन में वुड कटिंग डिपार्टमेंट है, तो फिर ईस्टर्न रीजन में भी होगा और वेस्टर्न रीजन में भी होगा. अगर सैंडिंग डिपार्टमेंट एक रीजन में है तो दूसरे में भी होगा, राइट? सो इन दैट वे you've got the similarity of functions that exist, and that creates a little bit of a it has a little bit of an influence there, right, within the organization. which is that it tends to increase the span of management, right? You now have not one department, but three departments doing sanding. Now you've got not one department doing gluing, you've got three departments doing gluing, right? So how do you deal with it, right? This factor has a tendency to decrease span of management control when subordinates have different functions. तो क्लियरली फिर इनको कोई सेपरेट जगहों पे रखा जाए। फॉर एग्जांपल अगर हम लें ना पाकिस्तान में और हम कहें कि यार हमारे पास ये फर्नीचर की फैक्ट्री है, तो इसका नॉर्थ, सेंट्रल और फिर सदर्न। तो नॉर्थ रीजन का जो ग्लूइंग डिपार्टमेंट, सैंडिंग डिपार्टमेंट और वो है, वो हमने पेशावर एरिया में रखा हो, सेंट्रल का हमने लाहौर में रखा हो, और जो सदर्न रीजन है उसका हमने कराची में रखा हो। So in that case, we've got three departments which are very far away from each other. So therefore, that overlap sort of vanishes a little bit. लेकिन अगर ये तीनों के तीनों एक ही किसी सिटी में पड़े होते ना, तो then we would be having a little bit of a problem. अच्छा, geographic contiguity means के ये कितने घुले मिले हैं या आपस में कितने दूर पड़े हुए हैं, right? So increase of span of control is there when the geographic regions are physically close to each other, or decrease of span of control will exist when the geographic regions are physically distant from each other, right? So this means अगर आप उसको देखें, शेल कॉरपोरेशन को देखें, तो वो बंदा जो कि फॉर एग्जांपल पेशावर डिस्ट्रिक्ट को कंट्रोल कर रहा है, उस बंदे को आप नौशहरा डिस्ट्रिक्ट या मर्दान डिस्ट्रिक्ट भी दे सकते हैं। सो दैट पर्सन will be able to control three districts, right? And that span of control has suddenly increased because these three geographic regions are contiguous. They're very near to each other. Now, if there was a region of, Peshawar and DI Khan and Lahore, so suddenly we've got regions that are very far away, and then you would need a different person to manage each of these regions, and thereby there will be a decrease in the span of managerial control. अच्छा, जितना कॉम्प्लेक्स होगा, सिंपल टास्क होंगी, वहाँ पे आपका स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल ज़्यादा होगा। जितना आपके पास कॉम्प्लेक्स टास्क होगी, उतना आपका स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल कम हो जाएगा। जितनी कोऑर्डिनेशन कम होगी, उतना आपका स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल ज़्यादा होगा। जितनी कोऑर्डिनेशन ज़्यादा होगी, उधर आपका स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल कम हो जाएगा। और जितना कम टाइम प्लानिंग पे लगेगा, तो उतना स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल फिर ज़्यादा चाहिए होगा। जितना टाइम आप प्लानिंग पे ज़्यादा लगाएंगे, तो उतना फिर आपको स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल को की तरफ डिक्रीज आएगी और रिडक्शन आएगी, राइट? सो दिस इज अ गुड वे to sort of think about the factors that affect the span of control and some possible reasons of why that span of control increases or decreases, right? So increase or decrease के reasons को आप ऐसे ही back of the mind रख लें, लेकिन mostly हमारी concern ये है कि factors क्या हैं, और इनको आप explain कर सकें कि ये span of control किस तरह से create करते हैं, right? और ये हो गई हमारी ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल की हाइट और उसका जो एक सेंस है स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल का, राइट? सो ऑन द लेफ्ट हैंड साइड we've got a very flat organization, right? इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में आपका क्या ख्याल है, स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल ज्यादा है कि थोड़ा है?
ज्यादा है सर।
ज्यादा है ना? द टॉप मैनेजर हैज कंट्रोलिंग 1 2 3 4 5 6 ऑल ऑफ देम, ठीक है? सो देयर इज अ वेरी हाई स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल। ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बी को अगर देखें, तो टॉप मैनेजर कितने लोगों को सुपरवाइज कर रहे हैं? दो। और फिर अगर मैनेजर 1 को देखें, तो वो 3 बंदों को कर रहे हैं। मैनेजर 2 को देखें, तो वो 3 बंदों को कर रहे हैं। सो वी हैव सडनली रिड्यूस द स्पैन ऑफ कंट्रोल, राइट? आपके ख्याल से ये ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल ए वाला टॉप मैनेजर बड़े आराम से ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को मैनेज करेगा, क्या ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बी वाला?
बी वाला सर।
बी वाला, बिकॉज he'll have fewer people to interact with, ठीक है? वन के साथ जो 1 2 3 वाले हैं वो कम्युनिकेट करेंगे, राइट? तो इंफॉर्मेशन will move from the bottom of the organization towards the top. और नॉर्मली ये होता है कि जब इंफॉर्मेशन बॉटम ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से ऊपर की तरफ जाती है तो वो समराइज होती हुई जाती है, वो सिंथेसाइज होती हुई जाती है, ठीक है, वो कंप्रेस होते हुए जाती है। और जब कम्युनिकेशन ऊपर से नीचे की तरफ जाती है तो वो एक्सपैंड करती है, डिटेल्ड होती जाती है, राइट। सो 1 2 3 1 के साथ कम्युनिकेट करेंगे और सिंथेसाइज्ड फॉर्म में करेंगे। 1 और 2 अपनी इंफॉर्मेशन को लेके उसको सिंथेसाइज करके टॉप मैनेजर के सामने रखेंगे। सो दिस टॉप मैनेजर इज गोइंग टू गेट वेरी relevant type of information coming to him in organization B, and he's not going to be overwhelmed with the nitty gritty details of how things are going, ठीक है। on the other hand in organization A, ये टॉप मैनेजर जो है इसके साथ वो ऑपरेशनल लेवल sort of details भी शेयर की जा रही होंगी, and 6 people will try to communicate with this manager at the same time। और अगर आप इन 6 के 6 से पूछे ना तो ये भी आपको कहेंगे कि यार हमें तो टाइम मिलता ही नहीं है, हमारा बॉस तो इतना बिजी होता है, कभी एक तरफ भाग रहे कभी दूसरी तरफ भाग रहे, तो वो हमें टाइम ही नहीं दे पा रहा, ना ही उसका फोकस ठीक है वगैरह वगैरह। एंड द टॉप मैनेजर विल आल्सो फील एक्सट्रीमली एग्जॉस्टेड, और वो खुद से भी इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को मैनेज करते हुए उसको एंजॉय नहीं कर रहा होगा, राइट। तो इधर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बी में क्या हो गया कि इट इज नाउ गॉट अ मोर बेटर टाइप ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर, एंड everybody will know what they have to do. Reporting relationships would be established. There's a scalar chain of command that's clearly there, और information flow करेगी टॉप मैनेजर की तरफ, right? अब क्या हम कह सकते हैं कि ए बहुत अच्छा है और बी खराब है? क्या हम कह सकते हैं कि बी बहुत अच्छा है और ए बहुत खराब है? तो हम कह भी सकते हैं, बट एट द सेम टाइम हम ये क्लेम नहीं भी कर सकते, बिकॉज इट डिपेंड्स ऑल्सो, it depends also on the nature of the work that is being done. It depends also on the type of work that is being performed, right? तो जितने creative efforts होंगे ना आर्टिस्ट वगैरह के रिलेटेड, और म्यूजिक रिलेटेड और ड्रामा और इस तरह की चीज़ें, तो उधर जितना आपके पास ये फ्लैटर हायरार्की होगी तो उतना आपका सिचुएशन ज़्यादा बेहतर चलती है। और जितना आपके पास ये प्रोडक्शन लेवल की कंसर्न्स आ जाती हैं तो उनमें जनरली आपका ये जो बिट ऑफ टॉलर ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्ट्रक्चर जो है ना, जिसकी हाइट ज़्यादा होगी, दैट वुड सीम टू वर्क अ लिटिल बिट बेटर, राइट। सो देयर इज़ नो मैजिक बुलेट सो टू स्पीक, कि बस एक ही है और ये गोली आप खा लें तो आपके ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की सारी जो प्रॉब्लम्स है वो रिजॉल्व हो जाएगी। तो ऐसा कोई भी मैजिक पिल नहीं है। रादर क्या करना है कि मैनेजर्स ने डिसाइड करना है, देखना है, एंड दे हैव टू देन फिगर आउट व्हाट टाइप ऑफ अ हायरार्किकल स्ट्रक्चर sort of works for them, right? और वो है ना एक खेल सा है, try and try again, learn and improve and fix yourself up, right? So with time you sort of do this। अगर आप ये नहीं करेंगे तो फिर आपके पास बड़ी अजीब सी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस बनी होंगी जो कि किसी खास काम की नहीं होगी, एंड पीपल वुड सिंपली वो शुरू शुरू में मैंने आपको बताया था, वो एल्फ्रेड चैंडलर ने कहा था ना कि विजिबल हैंड हमारे पास शुरू हो जाएगा। इनविजिबल हैंड तो हमें एडम स्मिथ ने दिया था कि वो मार्केट अपने आप को खुद चलाती है। विजिबल हैंड ये है कि इसमें फिर मैनेजर्स बन गए तो एक बार जब एक एक स्ट्रक्चर बन जाता है और बहुत से लोगों के पास मैनेजमेंट की कुर्सी आ जाती है, तो देन दे विल डू एनीथिंग टू सॉर्ट ऑफ कंटिन्यू टू रिटेन दैट पोजीशन। वो कुर्सी छोड़ने के लिए फिर कोई राजी नहीं होता है ना। तो अगर उसकी कोई यूटिलिटी नहीं है ना तो इन लोगों को हटाना अपने चेयर से और इनको रिमूव करके किसी और पोजीशन में डाल देना इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी वेरी इजी। तो इसके लिए बड़े सीरियस टाइप ऑफ कमिटमेंट चाहिए होगी फ्रॉम एग्जीक्यूटिव लेवल मैनेजमेंट जब भी रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग की बात आएगी। जब तक आपके सीनियर लेवल मैनेजमेंट कमिटेड नहीं होगी तो तब तक ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग हमारे पास पॉसिबल नहीं होगी, ठीक है। और ये वाली फिगर आपको सिंपली वो दिखा रहा है ना कि चेन ऑफ कमांड क्या है, as a sample organizational chart showing that adhering to the chain of command is not advisable in the sense that it probably doesn't always work in that way, right? चेन ऑफ कमांड तो बन गई है, लेकिन क्लासिकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस के अंदर हमारे पास और भी तरीक़ेकार हैं जिसके थ्रू कम्युनिकेशन हो रही होती है ना, और मैनेजमेंट हो रही होती है। और वो हमें यहाँ पे हिंट मिला था, कहाँ पे था ये, इनफॉर्मल ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्ट्रक्चर्स का, राइट? तो फॉर्मल तो हमारे पास था, तो इनफॉर्मल भी हमें एड करता है, एंड दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ हेल्प्स अस टू सॉर्ट ऑफ run the organization, right? So that concludes basically our lecture on organizational structures. Um, any questions on this one?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. So आप लोग क्या कर लेंगे कि थोड़ा सा ग्रेकुनस का जो फॉर्मूला है वो ज़रा देख लेंगे आप बुक में प्लीज़, और उसके साथ अपने आप को फेमिलियराइज कर लें। तो ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्ट्रक्चर्स तक अब हम पहुंच गए। अब ये कि आपको मैंने वो नहीं दिया है ना अभी तक, वो 20 मार्क्स के जो आपके मेरे पास पड़े हुए हैं, उसका मैंने आपको टास्क
Yes,
नहीं दिया हुआ है।
yes, sir. नहीं
दिया?
दिया सर, नहीं दिया,
नहीं?
नहीं दिया।
अच्छा,
Yes.
तो बड़ा सिंपल सा टास्क है बेटा, ये मैं टाइप अप करके आपके लिए गूगल क्लासरूम में भी डाल दूंगा, बट आई जस्ट वर्बली शेयर इट विद यू। टास्क ऐसा है कि चूंकि सब्जेक्ट मैनेजमेंट के रिलेटेड है, तो हम इसको थोड़ा सा मैनेजमेंट रिलेटेड ही रखेंगे। और करना आपने ये है कि यू जस्ट नीड टू सॉर्ट ऑफ गो ऑनलाइन। वैसे तो मैं आप लोगों को मार्केट में भेजता, लेकिन क्योंकि कोविड वगैरह है तो आई डोंट वांट टू सॉर्ट ऑफ एक्सपोज यू गाइस टू इट। तो करना आपने ये है कि कोई कोई अपनी फेवरेट कंपनी के बारे में सोचे ना। फॉर एग्जांपल आप नाइकी को बड़ा पसंद करते हैं, या उसके प्रोडक्ट्स आप बहुत यूज़ करते हैं, या मे बी आपको गुची बड़ा पसंद है, या आपको कोई और लुई विटॉन या आई डोंट नो कोई सा भी ब्रांड आपको पसंद है। सो आपने यूँ करना है कि उनकी उस कंपनी के बारे में थोड़ा सा आपने रिसर्च करनी है। You have to go online, you have to look up that company, and you need to find out कि इस कंपनी का विजन क्या है, इस कंपनी का मिशन क्या है, इस कंपनी की स्ट्रेटजी तो आपको मुश्किल ही है कि वो मिले, लेकिन समटाइम्स थोड़े से उसके हिंट मिल जाएंगे। सो कैन यू फिगर आउट, well you could definitely figure out what the mission and vision are, वो तो listed होंगे। Could you figure out what strategy that company is applying,
सर
right?
मार्केटिंग स्ट्रेटेजी ना बेसिकली उसकी।
देखिए मार्केटिंग तो एक पर्सपेक्टिव है ना, कंपनी के
Yes,
तो
sir.
मुख्तलिफ वो होते हैं, तो you could be taking different approaches to it. For example, अगर आप टोयोटा को देखें ना, खालिद एक सेकंड यार, आप अगर टोयोटा को देखें तो टोयोटा कंपनी एक बहुत बड़ी बला है, ठीक है। अब आप कहें कि मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी, तो अनिल भट्टी नामुमकिन है कि टोयोटा की एक ही मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी हो जो कि आपको उनकी वेबसाइट पे मिलेगी कि ये लो जी
Yes,
भाई
sir.
हमारी मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी है। आपको फिर क्या करना होगा कि उस टोयोटा कंपनी को डिवाइड करके किसी सेगमेंट को उसके देखना होगा। आप ये कह सकते हैं कि टोयोटा पाकिस्तान की मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी क्या है,
Yes,
ठीक
sir.
है। लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से उसकी मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी से ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट यह है कि उसकी सर्वाइवल स्ट्रैटेजी क्या है, या उसका जो स्ट्रैटेजी ऑफ बिजनेस ओवरऑल है वो क्या है। हाउ डज टोयोटा फॉर एग्जांपल compete with other car manufacturer here in Pakistan, that overall level strategy,
Okay,
okay,
sir.
not just the marketing।
Okay.
जी
Yes.
खालिद, आप क्या फरमाना चाह रहे थे?
सर मैं कह रहा था कि स्वॉट एनालिसिस भी कर सकते हैं कि नहीं?
क्या हो सकते हैं?
सर स्वॉट एनालिसिस कंपनी का
हाँ,
कर
अलायंस
सकते हैं। हाँ, स्वॉट एनालिसिस सर।
थोड़ा एग्जांपल दें मुझे, क्या 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 मतलब है आपके?
कंपनी का स्ट्रेंथ
He said
वीकनेस और
SWOT analysis. SWOT
देख के
analysis.
हम
स्वॉट एनालिसिस की तरफ तो मैं अभी गया ही नहीं ना, मैं स्वॉट एनालिसिस आप पे नहीं करवाना चाह रहा। मैं तो आपसे सिंपली कह रहा हूँ कि आप मुझे उस कंपनी का विजन बताएं, मुझे उसका मिशन बताएं, और मुझे बताएं कि उसकी आपके ख्याल से स्ट्रेटजी क्या है, ठीक है। फिर आपने क्या करना है कि पेस्टल एनालिसिस करना है। स्वॉट एनालिसिस तो मैं नहीं करवाना चाह रहा। आई वांट यू टू sort of tell me the environment in which that company is working, ठीक है? उसके पॉलिटिकल एनवायरनमेंट कैसी है, उसकी टेक्निकल एनवायरनमेंट कैसी है, ठीक है? वो पेस्टल को आप जब बुक में सर्च करेंगे तो उसके एक एक पी से क्या बनता है, और ई से क्या बनता है, और एस से क्या बनता है, और टी से क्या बनता है। सो यू नीड टू सॉर्ट ऑफ डू अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ अ पेस्टल स्कैन एंड टेल अस के इसका जो competitive।
हाँ, सिर्फ मुझे नहीं आ रही कि किसी को भी नहीं आ रही?
सर आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही सर।
किसी को भी नहीं आ रही।
बिजली चली गई है मुझे लगता है।
Guys, what Sarah is explaining, right? How are you supposed to do this for 20 marks?
Where there is will, there is way.
But like, he didn't explain how long it should be, or like, is he looking for certain points in it?
वो अभी बता रहे थे ना, लेकिन सर बीच में
Sir has left the meeting, by the way.
हाँ ना,
हम क्या कर रहे हैं अंदर?
Waiting
शायद
like
वापस आ
creeps.
जाए।
Let's just stare at each other.
I'm actually staring at your profile picture right now, Kiffy.
Hell yeah.
Oh man, I love it so much. Even my brother was just like, whoa, she's cool. Oh no, it's recording. Shoot.
Hell yeah. Who do you think will listen to this? Not me. Well, actually, yes, but no.
Admin.
Achala Goliaga, no?
Singer?
Achala Goli.
क्या से बोले?
अहमद अहमद तैयार हो जो।
अच्छा, हेलो जी, आई एम बैक। सॉरी, आई एम साइंसेस का इंटरनेट डाउन हो गया था।
वाओ।
Oh.
ऐसे तो मेरे घर का इंटरनेट ज्यादा रिलायबल है। अच्छा, सो सिंपल सी टास्क, ठीक है? जस्ट टू सॉर्ट ऑफ रिकैप, आपने क्या करना है, विजन और मिशन ढूंढना है। थोड़ा सा आपने सोचना है कि इस एंटिटी की, इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की जो आपने सिलेक्ट किया, उसकी स्ट्रेटजी क्या हो सकती है। आपने उसका थोड़ा सा पेस्टल स्कैन करना है, उसके जनरल एनवायरनमेंट जिसमें वो फंक्शन करती है उसके बारे में कुछ अल्फाज आपने टटोलने हैं, वो लिख लेने हैं। और ज़्यादा डिटेल मैं आपको इस पे ही दे दूंगा, इस पे गूगल क्लासरूम पे। but it's not simply just making this document. You also need to make a small presentation. ठीक है? Presentation कैसे करनी है आपने? You have a maximum of 10 minutes per person. Individually ये करेंगे क्योंकि आजकल आप घरों पे बैठे हुए हैं, so it is a task that you will do individually. और आपने एक 10 मिनट की वीडियो प्रेजेंटेशन बनानी है. अगर आप लड़के हैं तो उसमें आपकी शक्ल नजर आनी चाहिए. अगर आप लड़की हैं तो your voice is more than enough. You don't need to show your face in there unless you feel comfortable and you want to have the camera on. Otherwise, you could have the camera off and just your voice. You will record a maximum of 10-minute long talk on the facts that you have found about the company. You'll record your little presentation and you'll make a YouTube channel of your own and you will upload your presentation there. और आपने मुझे क्या रिटर्न करना है? आपने अपने प्रेजेंटेशन का जो डॉक्यूमेंट है, जो पावर पॉइंट में बनाया होगा या आपने माइक्रोसॉफ्ट वर्ड में बनाया होगा, वो आप मेरे साथ शेयर करेंगे और आप मुझे अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन का लिंक देंगे कि वो आपका जो यूट्यूब का चैनल है उसका जो भी लिंक है वो क्या है, and you'll make that available to me and I'll share everybody's link with everybody else in the classroom, so you could visit each other's YouTube channel and watch each other's presentations there. ठीक है? तो उनको फिर मैं देख के उसके मुताबिक मैं आपको फिर प्रेजेंटेशन के नंबर दूंगा. तो 10 marks for your little write-up and 10 marks for your presentation, and that would add up to be a total of 20 marks. ठीक है? और इसको आपने करना कब तक है? इसको आपने जितना जल्दी आप कर ले तो बेहतर होगा. So I would suggest that you try to wrap it up before the end of this month, because 1st of Feb से क्या हो जाएगा, आपके एग्जाम्स शुरू हो जाएंगे ना, तो you want to get rid of this as quickly as possible before that exam. And it's nothing difficult. एक घंटे डेढ़ का काम नहीं है. घर पे ही बैठ के आपने सारा फैक्ट फाइंडिंग करनी है और फिर आपने एक छोटी सी प्रेजेंटेशन रिकॉर्ड करके उसको यूट्यूब पे डाल के इधर लिंक दे देना है. तो गूगल क्लासरूम में I'll create an assignment for this where you can then upload your document and also put your link.
Sir, so for the presentation, you have to make a PowerPoint and you have to be in the video?
Yeah, just sort of like you, मेरी ये सजेशन होगी ना कि उसके लिए फिर अगर आप वो डाउनलोड कर लें, Zoom अगर डाउनलोड कर लें ना, तो Zoom is beautiful as far as creating this presentation is concerned. और उसकी जो PowerPoint आप चला रहे होंगे और साथ में आप अपनी टॉक दे रहे होंगे, Zoom will record that, जैसे कि Google Meet भी उसको रिकॉर्ड करता है. लेकिन Zoom की जो रिकॉर्डिंग की वो MBs हैं वो बड़ी कम होती है as compared to Google Meet. So if you record it in Zoom, you can then upload it into YouTube very quickly.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sir, are there some specific details or requirements you're looking for in the report or in the video or both?
हाँ, वो ज़्यादा डिटेल्स मैं आपको उस पे प्रोवाइड कर दूंगा through this Google Classroom.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Right? So I'll give you the written instructions there. Okay, any other questions?
No, sir.
No, sir.
चलो
sir.
जी.
I'm sorry, but like I just need to make sure. Are you going to give us a specific length for everything, like for the report? How are you gonna judge what are you gonna judge the 10 marks based off of?
As far as the presentation?
The report, sir.
The report उसका मैं आपको rubric दूंगा ना कि आपसे मैं किस के नंबर लगा रहा हूँ. So for example, मिशन स्टेटमेंट का एक नंबर अगर हो गया तो विजन के कितने नंबर हैं और फिर स्ट्रैटेजी के बारे में जो आपने लिखा होगा उसके अंदर मैं क्या कुछ देख रहा हूँ. So I'll give you a rubric, instructions मैं दूंगा.
And will you also give that about the video in the classroom?
It will be on the classroom and the form of an assignment, yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good. Anything else, guys?
No, sir.
Chalo, have fun. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Allah Hafiz, I need to stop this recording. वो आप लोगों ने जितनी गपशप मारी है ना वो सारी recorded है, unfortunately.